It starts like any other day, just another routine walk through the city. But in Savannah, Georgia, nothing is ever that simple. A single officer known for abusing his badge spots, a beautiful black woman walking alone. He thinks he's found his next target. He thinks she's someone he can humiliate, accuse, and tear down in front of a crowd that won't dare to stop him. But what he doesn't realize is that she's not just any woman. She's Vanessa Corleone of the most powerful defense contractors in the country, and the last person he should have messed with. What happens next? It's not just a confrontation. It's the start of something much bigger. A city about to face its own corruption. A community rising up. And a fight for justice that will shake Savannah to its core. So stick around, because trust me, you won't believe how this story ends. And before we dive in, do us a quick favor, drop a comment below and let us know what time you're watching and where you're tuning in from. We'd love to hear from you. Now, let's get started. It was supposed to be just another business trip, a quick flight, a few handshakes, a couple of speeches, and then back to DC before the weekend. But for Vanessa Cole, this visit to Savannah, Georgia, was going to turn into something no one could have predicted. Not her, not the people waiting to meet her, and certainly not the police officer who would come to regret the moment he ever crossed her path. Vanessa wasn't just any guest in this historic southern city. At 30 years old, she had already achieved more than most people could ever dream of. She wasn't just a CEO, she was the CEO of Coletech, a fast-rising defense technology company that provided cybersecurity infrastructure to some of the most classified sectors of the United States military. To the outside world, she was polished, powerful, and untouchable. But today, she looked just like any other visitor walking the streets of Savannah. No entourage. No security detail, just a young black woman enjoying the charm of a city that seemed frozen in time. Wearing a sleek light blue silk blouse, high-waisted black slacks, and low heels, Vanessa carried herself with effortless confidence as she made her way through the cobblestone streets. Her skin glowed in the warm southern sunlight, and her natural curly hair framed her face like a crown. She had landed just 2 hours ago, checked into her hotel, and decided to take a quiet walk before the long evening of meetings and speeches began. She could have called a car, but she preferred the feeling of being grounded, of walking among real people, breathing in the city's air, and seeing it for herself beyond the hotel lobbies and conference rooms. Savannah, with all its beauty, the oak trees draped in Spanish moss, the grand old homes with iron balconies, the distant sound of jazz playing from a street corner looked picture-perfect. But Vanessa knew better than to take appearances at face value. She had grown up in Baltimore, Maryland, in a neighborhood that taught her how to read the room, to sense the unspoken tensions hiding beneath polite smiles. And today, she felt them again, subtle but unmistakable. The lingering stares from older couples sitting outside a cafe. The way a shopkeeper's smile tightened when she walked by. The glances that lasted just a second too long. Still, Vanessa brushed it off. She had faced worse in boardrooms full of men twice her age who thought she didn't belong. She had stood her ground in defense contract negotiations with generals who underestimated her. A few stares in Savannah? Please. She was here to represent her company and her people with grace and strength, and no sideways glance was going to stop her from doing just that. After a few blocks, she spotted a small, locally owned cafe, the Savannah Bean. The kind of place that didn't look too crowded, with a little patio under a wide, shady tree. Perfect. She walked in, smiled politely at the woman behind the counter, and ordered a large, sweet tea, extra ice. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, nodded stiffly but didn't say much. Vanessa didn't mind. She paid in cash, left a tip, and took her drink outside to the patio. Settling onto a wooden bench under the shade, Vanessa let out a quiet sigh and took her first sip. Sweet, cold, and perfect for this kind of afternoon. She pulled out her phone, checking the time. She still had a couple of hours before she had to head back to prepare for the leadership summit. She could already imagine the headlines after tonight's keynote speech. Coletech CEO calls for stronger cyber defense partnerships. It wasn't just a career move for her, it was personal. She had worked her way up from nothing, and now She was sitting at the table with the people shaping the future of national security. She put her phone away, leaned back, and took in the sounds of the city, the distant rumble of cars, the laughter of a child somewhere down the block, the soft hum of life moving all around her. For just a moment, she felt completely at peace. But peace, as she was about to learn, doesn't last long when you're a young black woman in the wrong place at the wrong time, or at least, in the eyes of someone looking for trouble, someone who didn't care who she was, what she had accomplished, or what she represented. Because sitting just a block away, parked in his patrol car with the engine idling, was Officer Blake Tanner. And in just a few moments, his decision to confront her would change both of their lives forever. Savannah had a way of fooling you. On the surface, it was nothing short of breathtaking. Tourists came from all over the country to walk these streets, to marvel at the centuries-old oak trees, their branches heavy with Spanish moss swaying softly in the warm breeze. The city carried the kind of southern charm you'd expect to see in postcard horse-drawn carriages trotting along River Street, families taking photos in front of the historic fountains in Forsyth Park, street performers filling the squares with old jazz and blues. If you didn't know any better, you'd think this was a place where time had stood still in the most beautiful way. But Vanessa knew better. She could feel it, the way the air seemed to carry something else beneath that southern charm. It wasn't just the history, though Savannah had plenty of that. Wars fought, empires built, plantations thriving on the backs of enslaved people. No, this was something living, something breathing, something unspoken, and it had been following her since she left her hotel. She'd seen the stares, the sideways glances from couples walking their dogs, the way store owners seemed to stop their conversations when she passed by their windows. She noticed how a man on a bicycle slowed down just to look at her a little too long, his eyes narrowing as if trying to figure out whether she belonged here at all. It wasn't fear that Vanessa felt. It wasn't even anger. It was something far more dangerous: familiarity. This wasn't new to her. Not even close. She had walked into plenty of rooms where her presence alone seemed to make people uncomfortable, but she had learned long ago not to let it shake her. You don't climb to the top of a male-dominated industry by folding under pressure. You don't become one of the youngest black female CEOs in America by letting every whispered comment or suspicious glance get under your skin. So she kept walking. She passed by a boutique that had whites-only signs torn down long before she was born, but still carried the energy of exclusion. A man in a suit held the door for a white couple but let it shut in her face as she approached. Vanessa didn't flinch. She simply opened the door herself, smiled at the irony, and kept moving. She knew the history of cities like this. Beautiful on the outside, bruised on the inside. Savannah was built on wealth that came from the suffering of people who looked like her. And while the buildings had been restored, the cracks in the foundation were still there, if you knew where to look. Vanessa wasn't here to fight old battles. She was here to build new bridges, to meet with military leaders, cybersecurity experts, and government officials who actually wanted to work toward a better future. But as she walked down Abercorn Street toward the park, she couldn't shake the feeling that the city itself was reminding her of something she'd never really forgotten. You can wear the finest clothes, hold the highest titles, and sign the biggest contracts, but to some people, you'll always be just another black woman in the wrong neighborhood. She took another sip of her sweet tea, letting the cold drink settle the rising heat in her chest. She glanced down at her phone. No new messages, no calls, just the quiet hum of a city pretending everything was fine. Up ahead, she noticed a man sitting on a bench reading a newspaper. His face was hidden behind the pages, but his boots and the dark blue pants he wore were a dead giveaway. Savannah PD. He wasn't in a marked car. No flashing lights, no sirens, just sitting there, watching. Vanessa's heart skipped for just a second. She'd done nothing wrong, nothing even remotely suspicious. And yet, here it was, the weight of suspicion pressing down on her like gravity. She almost laughed to herself. She could be holding the president's personal laptop in one hand and a Navy SEAL's recommendation letter in the other. And still, this officer would probably see her the same way, as a problem. She considered turning back toward the hotel. But something in her refused. She hadn't worked this hard, come this far, just to be run off the street like she didn't belong. So she kept walking, holding her head high. As she crossed the street toward Forsyth Park, she could feel his eyes following her. And that's when she noticed the patrol car pulling up across the intersection. Another officer, this one staring straight at her, hand already resting on his belt. Not in a friendly way, not like someone keeping the peace, but like someone looking for an excuse. Vanessa took a deep breath. She knew this game. She'd seen how it started. What she didn't know was just how far they were willing to go today. What she didn't know was that Officer Blake Tanner had already made up his mind the moment he saw her walking alone. And in less than 5 minutes, Savannah would show her exactly what kind of city it still was beneath all that beauty. You see, not every threat wears a uniform, but sometimes, the ones that do are the most dangerous of all. Officer Blake Tanner had been sitting in his patrol car for almost 30 minutes when he first noticed her. His usual spot, parked under the shade of a large oak tree on East Jones Street, gave him a clear view of the foot traffic heading toward Forsyth Park. And when Vanessa Cole came into view, walking with that quiet confidence, that's when it started. At first, he didn't move. He just watched her through the smudged windshield of his cruiser, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel. To anyone else, it might have seemed like he was minding his own business. But to Blake Tanner, this was something personal. See, Tanner had a reputation in Savannah. Folks knew he had a short fuse, knew he didn't exactly follow the rules. He was the kind of cop who thought his badge gave him power over anyone who dared to make him feel small. And nothing made him feel smaller than a black woman who didn't flinch under his gaze. He'd grown up in this city, born and raised. His family went back generations. His grandfather had been on the force back in the 70s, and word around town was that the Tanner name still carried weight in certain circles. He wasn't just another cop to the old-timers on his block. He was young Tanner, the one they believed would keep Savannah safe. But what they really meant, whether they admitted it or not, was keeping folks like Vanessa in their place. Blake Tanner leaned back in his seat, squinting as he watched her cross the street. His partner, Officer Cindy Briggs, sat beside him, flipping through reports on her tablet. She didn't notice Vanessa at first, not until Tanner muttered under his breath, "Here we go." Cindy looked up, following his line of sight. "What are you talking about?" Tanner didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for the radio, his fingers hovering just above the button. Cindy raised an eyebrow. "Blake! Don't!" But Tanner didn't care. He pressed the button and spoke into the radio like he'd done 100 times before. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. Possible suspect matching the description of a recent theft at Magnolia Boutique. Black female, mid-30s, blue blouse. Headed toward Forsyth Park. Requesting clearance to investigate." There was a pause on the other end of the radio. Dispatch came back, confused. "Repeat, Unit 12. What theft? We don't have any active calls from Magnolia." Tanner smirked. "Local owner reported a theft earlier. No formal complaint yet, but the suspect matches descriptions from previous incidents. Standing by for clearance." Cindy's face tightened. "Blake, there hasn't been any theft. You're making this up." Tanner didn't even look at her. He pressed the radio again. "Requesting clearance." Another pause. Dispatch finally responded. "Unit 12, proceed with caution. Confirm ID before taking any further action." Tanner hung up the radio and cracked his knuckles. Cindy let out a frustrated sigh. "I swear, if this backfires—" "It won't," Tanner cut her off. "You worry too much." He started the engine and slowly pulled the cruiser forward, keeping his eyes locked on Vanessa as she continued walking, unaware of what was brewing behind her. Cindy shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She'd seen Tanner pull this kind of stunt before, but never with this much energy. Something about Vanessa had gotten under his skin more than usual. As they neared the intersection, Tanner leaned out the window, watching her every move like a predator sizing up its prey. He could already hear the story he'd tell back at the station, how he'd spotted a suspect, how he'd done his job, how he'd kept Savannah safe. But deep down, he knew this wasn't about safety. It was about control, about power, about reminding people like Vanessa that no matter how far they climbed, there was always someone waiting to pull them back down. He parked the cruiser just ahead of her path and stepped out, adjusting his belt with exaggerated authority. Cindy stayed in the car, her jaw clenched, knowing this wasn't going to end well. Tanner crossed his arms and stood by the passenger door, watching as Vanessa approached. He didn't say a word. Not yet. He just waited, letting the silence build, letting her feel the weight of his stare. But what Tanner didn't know, what he'd never understand, was that Vanessa Cole had spent her entire life walking through stairs just like his. And this? This wasn't going to break her. Not today. Not ever. The engine of the patrol car let out a low rumble as Officer Blake Tanner shifted his weight, cracking his knuckles like a man about to start a fight he had no business picking. Vanessa Cole, still sipping on her sweet tea, felt the shift in the air before she even realized the cruiser had parked up ahead. Something didn't feel right. You know that instinct you get when you're being watched? That cold rush that hits the back of your neck when someone locks in on you like a target? That's what she felt now. She slowed her steps but didn't stop walking. She knew better. Stopping was the first invitation for confrontation. She glanced around still, no reason to feel unsafe, at least nothing on the surface. People were out enjoying the sunshine, strolling through the park, snapping photos of the fountain. But none of them were looking her way. None of them noticed what she noticed. And the man leaning against the police cruiser ahead? He wasn't pretending anymore. He wanted her to see him. Tanner waited until she got close enough to hear him before he spoke, his voice loud and sharp like a slap in the face. "Hey, you there! Stop right where you are." Vanessa froze for half a second. She knew this moment. It was one every black person in America learned to prepare for, no matter their status, no matter their title. She turned slowly, keeping her expression calm but guarded. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice steady but polite. Tanner tilted his head like he was sizing her up. "Yeah, there's a problem. Got a report about a theft earlier today. You match the description." Vanessa felt her stomach drop, not in fear, but in sheer disbelief. She let out a small breath, more irritated than anything. She had heard about cops pulling this nonsense before. She just never expected it would happen here. Not like this. Not when she had done nothing but walk down a public street. "I think you're mistaken," Vanessa replied carefully. "I just got into town a few hours ago. I've been at my hotel and then walked here to get something to drink." Tanner took a step forward, making a show of adjusting his belt again, hand resting dangerously close to his holster. "I don't think I am. Why don't you go ahead and hand over your ID?" Vanessa considered her options. She knew the law. She knew she wasn't required to show ID unless she was suspected of committing a crime with reasonable suspicion. She also knew that refusing could escalate things fast. Keeping her movements slow and visible, she reached into her purse and pulled out her government-issued ID badge, the one that identified her as the CEO of Coltech and a registered federal contractor. She held it up without saying a word, letting him read it for himself. But Tanner didn't even look at it. He smirked like she had just shown him a toy from a cereal box. "Nice prop," he sneered. "I asked for ID. State issued." Vanessa felt the heat rising in her chest again. She knew exactly what was happening now. He didn't care who she was. He had already decided what she was. And nothing she said or showed him was going to change that. She took another breath, steadying herself. "I don't have to show you anything unless you have probable cause. What's your badge number, officer?" Tanner's jaw clenched. For a split second, his eyes flashed not with fear, but with something worse. Enjoyment. Like he'd been waiting for her to push back, just so he could push harder. "That's how you want to play it?" he snapped. He leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Keep talking, and I'll show you just how fast you can end up in cuffs." Cindy Briggs, still sitting in the patrol car, watched the whole thing unfold. Her fingers hovered over her own radio, her instincts telling her this wasn't just Badit was about to get worse. She opened her door halfway, leaning out. "Blake," she called, trying to defuse it. "Come on, let's just clear it and move on." But Tanner ignored her. His attention stayed locked on Vanessa, like a wolf circling its prey. "You heard me," he barked. "Hands where I can see them." Vanessa lifted her hands slowly, the street around them suddenly feeling smaller, tighter, like the whole city had shrunk down to this one moment. She could hear her heart pounding in her ears. She wasn't going to run. She wasn't going to back down. but she knew one wrong word, one wrong move, and this could spiral into something much bigger than either of them expected. And then, with a flick of his wrist, Tanner reached for his radio again. "Dispatch, Unit 12 requesting immediate backup. Suspect is non-compliant. Possible threat." Vanessa couldn't believe what she was hearing. Non-compliant? Threat? She hadn't moved a muscle, but it didn't matter. Tanner was writing a script, and she already knew how these stories usually ended, but not this time. Not if she could help it. And just like that, the situation had shifted from uncomfortable to dangerous. Vanessa stood frozen, her hands still raised slightly in front of her, the sweet teacup shaking just a little in her right hand. She could feel the attention starting to shift. People walking nearby began to slow down, glancing over to see what the commotion was. Some pulled out their phones, sensing something wasn't right. A couple walking their dog across the street whispered to each other, pausing near a lamppost as they observed the interaction unfold. Tanner took another step forward, his hand now resting fully on his holstered firearm. The sight of that alone sent a wave of adrenaline crashing through Vanessa's body, but she forced herself to stay calm. He wasn't about to give him any excuse to escalate this further. "I'm not a threat," she said firmly, making sure her voice was loud enough for the bystanders to hear. "I've done nothing wrong. I'm standing here peacefully in public." Tanner's lip curled into a sneer. "That's not what I asked. Hands where I can see them. Now." His voice was sharper, louder, like he wanted the whole block to hear him. Vanessa let the cup fall from her hand, the plastic bouncing once on the ground before rolling to the edge of the sidewalk. She slowly raised both hands higher, making sure every move was deliberate, controlled. Her eyes scanned the crowd, locking onto a few people holding up their phones. Good. Someone was recording. Someone was documenting this. She wasn't alone. But then came the moment she dreaded most. Tanner lunged forward without warning, grabbing her wrist and yanking it down so hard that her body twisted with the force. Vanessa let out a sharp gasp as he pulled her arm behind her back, forcing her to turn around. His grip was tight, aggressive, and in seconds he had his other hand on the back of her neck, shoving her toward the hood of the patrol car. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" someone from the crowd shouted. "Let her go," another voice called out. Cindy Briggs was out of the car now, moving quickly toward them. "Blake, stop! You don't have cause for this!" she yelled, her voice shaking with frustration. But Tanner didn't stop. He pressed Vanessa down onto the hood of the cruiser, the hot metal burning through the thin fabric of her blouse. Vanessa clenched her jaw, biting back the urge to cry out. She knew the moment she raised her voice, the moment she struggled, he'd twist the narrative even more. "Suspect is resisting," Tanner barked into his radio, even though everyone could see she wasn't resisting at all. "No, she's not," Cindy shot back, stepping closer, trying to pull Tanner's attention away. "Blake, let's talk about this. This isn't right." Tanner ignored her, reaching for his handcuffs. The click of the metal rang out like a gunshot. Vanessa's breathing quickened, her heart pounding in her chest. She had to do something. She had to say something before this got even further out of control. "I am Vanessa Cole," she shouted, her voice breaking through the tension like a lightning bolt. "I am the CEO of Coltech, a federal defense contractor. I am here on government business." The crowd gasped. Even Cindy froze for a second, her mouth opening slightly in shock. But Tanner just laughed. A cold, mocking laugh that sent chills down Vanessa's spine. "Yeah? And I'm the President of the United States," he sneered. Vanessa felt her blood boil. She had worked her entire life for moments like this, meetings with military leaders, government officials, policymakers, and now, here she was, being treated like a criminal for simply walking down the street. "Call your captain," she demanded, her voice shaking with both fear and rage. "Right now! Call Captain Walker!" Tanner didn't flinch. He tightened his grip on her wrist, leaning down so close that she could feel his breath on her ear. "You don't give the orders here," he whispered. "I do." The crowd was louder now, more people gathering, more cameras recording. Someone yelled, "We're live on Facebook! The whole city's watching!" That's when Vanessa knew this wasn't just about her anymore. This was bigger. This was every story that had ever gone untold, every injustice that had never been caught on camera. She couldn't let this end quietly. "Not now. Get your hands off me," she said again, louder this time. "I'm not a threat. I'm a citizen. I have rights." Tanner's face darkened. He grabbed the back of her blouse with one hand, and in a move so violent it stunned the entire crowd, he ripped it straight down the middle, tearing the fabric open and exposing her bra to everyone watching. The gasps turned to screams. "Hi!" someone yelled. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Vanessa's face flushed with shock and humiliation, her body trembling as she struggled to cover herself. Cindy rushed forward, grabbing Tanner's shoulder and yanking him backward. "Blake, that's enough!" she shouted. For a moment, Tanner seemed stunned, like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. But the damage was done. The cameras had caught every second. The crowd was now in an uproar, some shouting at Tanner, others moving toward Vanessa to help her. Cindy positioned herself between them, holding her hands out to keep Tanner back. "You're out of control," she hissed under her breath. Vanessa, holding the torn edges of her blouse together, turned toward the nearest person with a phone. She looked directly into the camera, her voice shaking but clear. "My name is Vanessa Cole," she said. "I am a federal defense contractor, and this officer just assaulted me." The video would hit the internet within minutes, and Savannah would never be the same again. The air was no longer still. It was charged electric, heavy, and alive, with something Savannah hadn't felt in a long time: public outrage. The second Tanner's hands had torn through Vanessa's blouse, the crowd turned from quiet witnesses to an angry, vocal force. People were shouting from every direction now. Some moved in closer, some called 911. Others stood frozen in shock, their phones held high, broadcasting live to anyone willing to watch. Vanessa's breath was shaking, but her spirit wasn't broken. She pulled the torn fabric together, covering herself as best she could, her eyes burning not just with humiliation but with fury. She could hear Cindy Briggs still arguing with Tanner, trying to hold him back. But Tanner, blinded by whatever personal demons drove him, wasn't ready to let go. "You need to calm down," Tanner barked again, raising his voice like he was the victim in all this. But no one was buying it anymore. The crowd was getting louder. "She didn't do anything," one woman shouted. "You're on camera, man. You're done," another man yelled. Cindy turned toward the growing circle of people and held up her hands. "Everyone back up! We have this under control," she lied, trying desperately to defuse the situation. But the truth was written all over her face. Nothing was under control. Not Tanner, not the crowd, not this moment. Vanessa straightened her posture, standing tall in front of the cruiser, her breath still heavy but her voice sharpening like steel. She wasn't going to let him define this moment, not after everything she'd worked for. Not after everything she'd survived. "I told you who I am," Vanessa said, loud enough for the whole park to hear. "I told you I'm here on official government business. You assaulted me, you humiliated me, and now you're trying to twist this into something it's not." Tanner's face turned red, but his arrogance refused to back down. He gestured toward the cameras. "She's lying. Y'all don't know who this woman is. She's resisting. She's refusing to comply." But now, even Cindy couldn't hide it anymore. She spun around to face the crowd. "She's not resisting," Cindy shouted. "I've been standing here the whole time. He's escalating this for no reason." That was the breaking point. One by one, the bystanders began stepping forward, not aggressively, but united. A wall of people standing between Tanner and Vanessa, dozens of phones recording every second. People from all walks of life, black, white, young, old, closing the gap, sending a message that they weren't going to let this slide. Tanner's eyes darted around. He wasn't used to losing control of the narrative, not like this. His hand twitched near his belt again, and for a terrifying second, Vanessa thought he might reach for his weapon. But then, someone stepped out from the crowd, a tall, older man, probably in his late 60s, wearing a navy blue blazer and a church pin on his lapel. His voice cut through the noise like a hammer on glass. "That's enough," the man said firmly. "You're finished, officer." The man held up his own phone, showing a live broadcast with thousands of viewers. "The whole city is watching this, and I just got off the phone with the police captain himself." Tanner stiffened. "Who the hell are you?" The man took another step forward. "My name is Reverend Charles Peterson, and I've been on the phone with Captain Samuel Walker for the last 10 minutes. He's on his way right now." Vanessa's heart skipped. She had heard that name before. Captain Walker, a man known for trying to clean up the department from the inside. She silently prayed the Reverend was telling the truth. Tanner's arrogance cracked for the first time. His hand slowly dropped away from his belt. He glanced back at Cindy, who stood frozen, waiting to see what he'd do next. And then, the sirens. 2 patrol cars pulled up fast, lights flashing but sirens cutting off as they screeched to a stop. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped Captain Samuel Walker himself. Tall, broad-shouldered, a black man whose face carried the weight of decades in law enforcement. His jaw clenched as he took in the scene, the crowd, the cameras, Vanessa clutching her torn blouse. He didn't need to ask what had happened. He already knew. "Blake Tanner," Walker called out, his voice booming across the park. "Step away from that woman, right now!" Tanner hesitated for just a moment too long. "Now!" Walker roared. Tanner stepped back, but his face twisted in defiance. "Captain, she—" "Don't say another word," Walker snapped. He turned to Vanessa, his face softening with recognition. "Miss Cole, are you hurt?" Vanessa nodded slightly, fighting to keep her composure. "I'm fine, for now." Walker turned back to Tanner, his voice cold and controlled. "You're relieved of duty, right here, right now. Hand over your badge and weapon." The crowd erupted into applause, some cheering, some crying. But Walker wasn't finished. He turned to Cindy Briggs. Did you witness this?" Cindy nodded. "I did. The whole thing." Walker nodded once. "You're with me." As Walker and Cindy approached Vanessa, Walker lowered his voice. "I'm so sorry this happened. We'll make it right." Vanessa, still clutching the fabric of her ruined blouse, locked eyes with Walker. "You better?" she whispered. Because after today, the whole world was watching, and Savannah had a choice to make. Protect its broken system, or finally, tear it down. Everything about the park had changed in the span of just a few minutes. What started as a routine walk had spiraled into a public crisis, one that now had Savannah's top brass standing face to face with a decision that could either bring justice or blow up into something far worse. Captain Samuel Walker stood tall. But you could tell by the way his jaw clenched that he wasn't just battling Tanner's arrogance, he was battling the weight of years of unchecked abuse within his own department. Walker didn't wait for the cameras to stop rolling. He didn't care that they were there. Maybe that's what made his next move even more powerful. He walked right up to Tanner, standing toe-to-toe with him in front of the entire city. You could hear the leather of Walker's gloves creak as he curled his hands into fists at his sides. But instead of raising his voice again, Walker spoke low, controlled, deadly serious. "You have 30 seconds to hand over your badge and gun," Walker said, his voice tight like a spring ready to snap. "Or I'll take them off you myself." Tanner's face twisted in disbelief. "You're gonna take her word over mine?" Walker didn't blink. I'm taking the word of every single witness here, every camera that's rolling, and my own officer, who just testified against you in front of this entire community." Cindy Briggs stood nearby, her arms crossed over her chest, her face pale but firm. She nodded once, not backing down. Tanner's breathing grew heavier. His pride was breaking apart in real time, and in that moment, you could see it, the fear he'd tried so hard to hide. The fear that his days of getting away with this kind of behavior were finally over. Slowly, with his jaw twitching and his teeth grinding, Tanner reached for his badge. He unpinned it from his uniform and dropped it into Walker's outstretched hand. Then, after a long pause, he unbuckled his belt, pulled out his department-issued firearm, and handed that over too. Walker didn't say another word to him. He turned his back on Tanner like the man no longer existed, and in that moment, he didn't. The crowd erupted again, some clapping, some still recording, some shaking their heads in disbelief that it had even gone this far. But Vanessa stood in the middle of it all, still gripping the torn fabric of her blouse, her body trembling from head to toe. This wasn't over. Not even close. Walker turned toward her again, his face softening as he approached. "We're going to take you somewhere safe," he said quietly, just for her to hear. "Do you need medical attention?" Vanessa shook her head. But I'm not leaving this park until every one of those people hears me say who I am, what just happened here. I'm not letting it get swept under the rug." Walker nodded in understanding. He turned to Cindy and gave her a silent signal to stay close. Then, he raised his hand to quiet the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice strong and steady, "you've all witnessed something today that no one should ever have to experience. What happened here was unacceptable, and I promise you this department will answer for it." He turned to Vanessa, gesturing for her to step forward. The crowd grew quiet again as she took a deep breath and stood tall, despite her torn clothing, despite the humiliation she had just endured. "My name is Vanessa Cole," she announced, her voice breaking but growing stronger with every word. "I am the CEO of Cole Tech, a federal defense contractor. I'm here on official business, meeting with military and government leaders to strengthen the cybersecurity of this nation. And today, I was assaulted in broad daylight by a man who swore an oath to protect this city." People gasped. Some whispered to each other in disbelief. Others nodded, recording every word, knowing this would make headlines across the country by morning. "I'm not just here for me," Vanessa continued. "I'm here for every person who's ever been humiliated, harassed, or abused by someone wearing a badge who thought they could get away with it. I'm here to tell you those days are over. We deserve better. And it starts today, right here in Savannah." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't wild. It was steady, powerful. It grew as more people began to realize the weight of what had just happened. A woman who should have been broken was standing in front of them like she was just getting started. Walker leaned in again, his voice low. "Miss Cole, we need to get you somewhere safe. You're exposed. Let me help." Vanessa nodded reluctantly. "All right, but I'm not leaving town until this is on every desk at City Hall." "You have my word," Walker replied. As they began to move toward the second patrol car, a young woman from the crowd stepped forward and draped her denim jacket over Vanessa's shoulders. Vanessa turned to thank her, but the woman just smiled. "Thank you for standing up," the woman whispered. Walker opened the back door of the cruiser, but Vanessa hesitated before getting in. She turned back to the crowd one last time. "Keep recording," she called out. "Don't stop. Don't let them hide this." And with that, she ducked into the cruiser, Cindy following close behind. Walker climbed into the driver's seat, fired up the engine, and pulled away from the curb as the crowd began to scatter, some cheering, some calling news stations, some walking away with a new sense of purpose burning in their hearts. Because what had started as a simple walk for sweet tea had become something much bigger. A line had been crossed in Savannah. And this time, nobody was going to let them erase it. Sometimes, silence can feel louder than any crowd. That's what hit Vanessa as the police cruiser pulled away from Forsyth Park. The shouting, the clapping, the chaos, all of it faded behind her. Now, it was just the hum of the engine and the low crackle of the police radio filling the space. But her mind? Her mind was anything but quiet. She held the borrowed denim jacket tighter around her chest, her hands trembling slightly, though she tried hard to hide it. Cindy Briggs sat next to her in the back seat, glancing over every few seconds like she wanted to say something but didn't know where to start. And Captain Walker? He kept both hands on the steering wheel, his face locked in that tight, unreadable expression, like a man carrying the weight of the entire city on his shoulders. Vanessa broke the silence first. "Where are you taking me?" Walker's grip on the wheel tightened for a split second before he answered. "Someplace safe, somewhere you can clean up, catch your breath, somewhere private." Vanessa let out a breath that was part exhaustion, part frustration. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said quietly. "There's no such thing as private anymore, not after what just happened. The whole city saw it. Hell, the whole country's probably watching by now." Walker sighed, pulling the cruiser to a stop at a red light. He turned to face her, his voice low and steady. "I know, but you're still shaken. You need a minute to regroup before this gets bigger." Vanessa shook her head. "It's already bigger, and the minute I step into whatever building you're taking me to, they'll spin it. Say you whisked me away to protect the department's image. Say I was just some troublemaker who made this whole thing up. I've seen how this plays out, Captain. I'm not new to this." Cindy finally spoke up, her voice hesitant but honest. "She's right. We can't hide her away. That's what they'll expect us to do." Walker exhaled slowly, nodding in agreement. He turned the cruiser around and started heading back toward City Hall. "Then we go public," he said. "We don't hide anything." Vanessa's eyes widened. "You're serious?" Walker glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "Dead serious. You want this to stay public? You want this city to face what happened? Then you stand with me at the press conference. We do this together. Full transparency." Vanessa didn't answer right away. The idea of standing in front of reporters, reliving what had just happened, felt like ripping open a wound that hadn't even started to heal. But she knew it had to be done, not just for her, but for every black woman who'd ever been humiliated, disrespected, or silenced. "I'll do it," she finally whispered. "But I'm speaking first. No statements, no scripts. My words. For better or worse. Koppler and of Keeb." "Koppler," Walker nodded. "Your words." The next hour was a blur. City Hall was already buzzing when they arrived. Word had spread faster than anyone expected. News vans were parked outside. Reporters gathered near the steps, their microphones ready. Police officers lined the entrance, some looking nervous, some looking ashamed. Vanessa was led through a side door, escorted to a small conference room where a bottle of water and a fresh blouse had been left on the table. Cindy stood by the door, giving her space but not leaving her alone. Vanessa took a deep breath, staring at her reflection in the window. She barely recognized the woman looking back, but she knew one thing for sure: this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning. When they finally walked into the press briefing room, the lights were blinding. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But all of it faded when Vanessa stepped up to the podium, her hands gripping the edges like they were the only things keeping her grounded. She scanned the crowd, letting the silence hang in the air for just a moment before she spoke. "My name is Vanessa Cole," she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "And I'm standing here today not as a CEO, not as a defense contractor, but as a black woman who was publicly humiliated by a man who wore a badge." The room fell silent. "This city, this country, we have a problem. A deep, ugly problem that's been swept under the rug for far too long. What happened to me wasn't just about me. It was about every black woman who's ever been treated like she didn't belong. Every black woman who's ever been told to lower her voice, to stay in her place, to comply or face the consequences." She paused, her throat tightening, but she pushed through. "I was accused of a crime I didn't commit. I was assaulted in front of witnesses. My dignity was ripped away literally. And if it wasn't for the brave people who stood up, who recorded, who spoke out, I might not be standing here at all." Cameras clicked. Pens scribbled on notepads, but Vanessa didn't stop. "This city owes more than an apology. It owes change, real change, and I'm not leaving Savannah until I see it." Captain Walker stepped forward then, standing beside her, his face unreadable but his posture firm. "I stand with Miss Cole," he announced, "and I vow that this department will face every consequence that comes from what happened today. We are opening a full investigation not just into Officer Tanner's actions, but into every complaint this department has received over the last 10 years. Effective immediately, I am suspending all involved officers without pay pending the outcome of that investigation." The room erupted with questions, but Walker raised his hand to silence them. "This is not a show," he continued. "This is accountability. And if that means my job is on the line, so be it." Vanessa looked at him, surprised by his words. For the first time all day, she saw something real in his eyes: genuine regret, maybe even hope. The press conference ended with the sound of reporters shouting questions that would have to wait for another day. But the message had been sent, loud and clear. Vanessa turned to Walker as they stepped off the platform. "You really think they'll follow through?" Walker nodded slowly. "I don't know. But I'm done protecting a system that doesn't deserve protecting. Whatever comes next, we face it together." And with that, they walked out of the building, not as victim and officer, not as CEO and captain, but as two people who had just sparked something bigger than either of them could have imagined. The thing about going public is this: you don't get to take it back. Once the words leave your mouth, once the cameras roll, it's out there, forever. Vanessa knew that better than anyone. She could feel it in her bones as she walked out of City Hall. The air felt different, thicker, like the weight of what she'd started was following her with every step. The news had already hit national headlines. Her phone buzzed with calls from reporters, military partners, even friends back in D.C. Some messages were filled with support, some were filled with fear, and others, warnings. Warnings to be careful. Warnings that speaking up would make her a target. She already knew that, but what none of them understood was that she'd been a target her whole life. This wasn't new. What was new was how many people were finally watching. Captain Walker walked beside her, silent but steady. Cindy Briggs stayed a few steps behind, her hand resting near her radio, like she was ready to jump in if things got ugly again. But the streets of Savannah were eerily quiet. Too quiet. "Where to now?" Cindy finally asked. Vanessa didn't even hesitate. "I need to go back to the hotel. I need to finish what I came here to do." Walker raised an eyebrow. "You still want to go through with those meetings?" Vanessa stopped walking and turned to face him. "Of course I do. You think this city's gonna scare me off? I'm not going anywhere." Walker nodded slowly, like he was starting to understand the kind of fight Vanessa carried with her. The kind that didn't back down. The kind that only got louder when someone tried to silence it. They loaded back into the cruiser, this time with Vanessa riding in the front seat. No more back seat, no more silence. She wasn't here to be hidden away. The drive to the hotel felt longer than before, even though it was only a few blocks. Vanessa kept her head high, staring out the window as they passed groups of people standing on street corners, some watching them pass, some holding their phones like they were ready to start recording again if they had to. When they finally pulled up to the hotel, Walker put the car in park but didn't move. "Look," he said quietly, "there's something you need to know before you go in there." Vanessa turned to him, waiting. "There are people inside who, let's just say they don't want you to keep pushing this," Walker continued. "City officials, maybe more, I don't know who exactly, but they're already trying to spin it, trying to say you provoked Tanner, that you staged this." Vanessa felt her stomach twist. "Of course they are. I'm telling you because I don't want you walking in blind," Walker added. "You've got people watching your every move now. Some of them want justice, but some of them, they want this to go away, fast." Vanessa nodded slowly. She'd expected this. Hell, she'd prepared for it. But hearing it out loud still hit different, still felt like another slap in the face. "I appreciate the warning," she replied. "But I'm not backing down." Walker gave her a nod of respect. "Didn't think you would." Vanessa opened the door and stepped out, adjusting the denim jacket around her shoulders. She turned back to Cindy, who was already getting out of the back seat. "Thank you," Vanessa said quietly. Cindy gave a small nod. "Be careful." Vanessa took a deep breath and walked toward the hotel entrance. She could feel the eyes on her before she even stepped through the door. Guests in the lobby, hotel staff, even the security guard near the elevators. They all knew. They all watched the same footage that millions had already seen. And yet, no one said a word. She walked to the elevator, pressed the button, and waited. When the doors slid open, she stepped inside and hit the button for the top floor. As the elevator climbed, Vanessa felt her heart pounding again. Not from fear but from the weight of what came next. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was the face of a fight much bigger than herself. When the doors opened, she stepped out into the hallway and walked toward her suite. But something felt off. The hallway was too quiet, the air too heavy. She glanced over her shoulder, checking behind her. Nothing. No one. She reached her door, slid the key card in, and pushed the door open. That's when she saw it. Her suite had been trashed, papers scattered, furniture overturned, her laptop smashed on the floor. And written across the mirror in red spray paint were 3 words that made her blood run cold. "Stay quiet now." Vanessa stood frozen in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat. She didn't have to guess who did it. She didn't need proof. This wasn't random. This was a message, and it was loud and clear. She backed out of the suite, slamming the door shut behind her. She grabbed her phone and dialed Walker's number with shaking hands. When he answered, she didn't waste a second. "They've already hit my room," she whispered. "Someone's trying to scare me off." Walker didn't hesitate. "Get back downstairs, now." Vanessa ran for the elevator, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel every eye in the lobby locking onto her as she rushed back outside. Cindy and Walker were already waiting by the cruiser. Walker saw the look on her face and didn't even ask. He just opened the door and waved her in. "Let's go," he ordered. As they pulled away from the hotel, Vanessa clenched her fists in her lap. She'd expected backlash. She'd expected them to try to silence her. But seeing her room destroyed like that, it lit a new fire in her chest. They wanted her to back down? Not a chance. This was only the beginning. The hotel was no longer safe. That much was clear. Vanessa sat in the cruiser, staring out the window as they drove farther away from downtown Savannah. The streets blurred past her, but her mind wasn't on the scenery. It was on that message. Those 3 words, sprayed across the mirror in blood-red paint, were burned into her memory now. Stay quiet now. Walker drove in silence, his jaw tight, his eyes never leaving the road. Cindy sat in the back, clutching her radio like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. The weight of what had just happened wasn't lost on any of them. This wasn't just police misconduct anymore. This was personal. This was a threat. They finally pulled into a small parking lot behind a local community center on the east side of town. It wasn't much to look at, just an old brick building with faded paint and a crooked sign that read Mount Hope Baptist Outreach. But when Walker turned off the engine and looked at Vanessa, his voice softened for the first time all day. "I grew up in this place," he said quietly. "My mom used to run the food pantry here. It's off the radar. You'll be safe for a little while." Vanessa nodded, thankful for the sanctuary, even if only temporary. She followed Walker inside, her steps feeling heavier with every passing minute. Cindy stayed close behind, checking every corner as they moved through the narrow hallway toward a small office in the back. The room smelled like old books and lemon cleaner. A wooden cross hung crookedly on the wall, and a dusty fan hummed softly in the corner. It wasn't glamorous, but right now, it felt like the safest place in the city. Walker closed the door behind them and turned to face Vanessa. "We need to talk about what's next." Vanessa crossed her arms over her chest. "You mean the part where I back down and let them win?" Walker shook his head. "The part where you figure out how to fight back without getting yourself killed." Cindy leaned against the desk, her face pale but determined. "We've stirred up something big, Vanessa. Bigger than just Tanner. Bigger than just the department. Somebody powerful wants this to go away, and they're not going to stop until you either disappear or you shut up." Vanessa felt the fire rise in her chest again. "I'm not going anywhere, and I'm sure as hell not staying quiet." Walker nodded slowly. "Then we need backup. Real backup." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number without saying a word. Vanessa watched as he stepped into the hallway, closing the door halfway behind him. She could hear him speaking in hushed tones, but she couldn't make out the words. Cindy walked over and handed Vanessa a bottle of water. "You okay?" Vanessa let out a bitter laugh. "Define okay." Cindy leaned against the desk again, her expression softening. "Look, I know I should have stopped him sooner. I should have done more. But I'm here now, and I've got your back." Vanessa looked at her, searching her face for any sign of dishonesty. But all she saw was guilt. Real guilt. The kind that weighed on a person long after the cameras stopped rolling. "Then don't let them spin this," Vanessa whispered. "Don't let them make me the villain." Cindy nodded. "Not a chance." Walker stepped back into the room, his face unreadable. "Help is on the way," he announced. "But it's going to take a little time." Vanessa stood up, pacing the room. "Time we don't have." Walker rubbed the back of his neck. "There's something else. Something I didn't tell you earlier." Vanessa stopped pacing. "What?" Walker took a deep breath. "Tanner's not working alone. Word is, there are people higher up, city officials, maybe even state level, who've been covering for him for years. This goes deeper than I thought." Vanessa felt her stomach drop. "You think they're the ones who trashed my room?" Walker nodded. "I'd bet my badge on it." Cindy cursed under her breath. "This just keeps getting worse." Vanessa clenched her fists. "Then we blow it wide open. All of it. We go after every single one of them." Walker held up a hand. "Slow down. You need evidence. Solid proof. Otherwise, they'll paint you as some outsider trying to take down the city for personal gain." Vanessa's mind raced. She knew he was right. She needed more than just her word. She needed documents, witnesses, recordings, anything that tied Tanner to the people pulling the strings. "Where do we start?" she asked. Walker glanced at Cindy, then back at Vanessa. "There's a guy, a city clerk named Howard Daniels. He's been feeding me small bits of information for months, trying to expose the corruption. He's scared, but he knows where the bodies are buried, figuratively speaking." Vanessa leaned in. "Can we trust him?" Walker sighed. "We don't have much of a choice." Cindy grabbed her radio. "Then let's move." But before they could leave, Vanessa's phone buzzed again. She looked down to see a text from an unknown number. "We know where you are. Stop while you still can." Her heart skipped. She held the phone up for Walker and Cindy to see. Cindy swore again. "They're tracking you." Walker grabbed the phone, yanking out the battery before tossing it in the trash. "We move now. No more delays." They rushed out of the office, back into the cruiser and into the night. The city lights blurred past them again, but this time, the stakes were higher than ever. Vanessa knew one thing for sure: this wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about tearing down an entire system built to protect men like Tanner. And she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. They drove in silence again. But this time, it wasn't fear hanging in the air. It was strategy. Vanessa's mind raced as she tried to piece together what was happening. Every turn they made through Savannah's side streets felt like they were being hunted. Cindy kept checking the mirrors. Walker kept his hand near his sidearm, like he expected a car to come up on them at any second. Vanessa knew the game had changed the moment she saw that message on her phone. They weren't just trying to intimidate her anymore. They were tracking her, following her, trying to get ahead of her next move. And if Walker was right, if city officials were protecting Tanner, then she wasn't just fighting one man, she was fighting a machine. A whole system that had been designed to cover itself, to silence people like her before they ever got close to exposing the truth. But Vanessa wasn't scared. Not anymore. She was angry, and anger had a way of sharpening your vision. Walker made one last turn and parked the cruiser in front of a tiny mechanic shop on the edge of town. The lights were off, but Vanessa could see movement inside, a figure pacing behind the dusty glass window. "That's him," Walker said. "Howard Daniels." Vanessa didn't wait for permission. She opened the door and stepped out, pulling the borrowed jacket tighter around her shoulders. Cindy followed close behind, hand on her radio again. Walker knocked twice on the metal door. It slid open just a crack, revealing the nervous face of a middle-aged white man with graying hair and shaking hands. "Captain Walker?" the man whispered. Walker nodded. "It's us, Howard. Let us in." Howard opened the door fully and locked it again the moment they were inside. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, dark circles under his eyes, sweat on his forehead. "You shouldn't have come here," Howard hissed. "They're watching me. They're watching everybody." Vanessa stepped forward. "Then give us something they can't cover up." Howard looked her up and down, recognizing her immediately from the news. His face twisted with guilt. "You're her," he whispered. "The woman from the park." Vanessa nodded. "I am. And I'm not leaving until I get what I came for." Howard ran a shaky hand through his thinning hair. "You don't get it. Tanner's just a pawn. The real player's city manager Aldridge, Councilman Bryce, even a few state reps. They've been covering for that man for years. Every complaint, every lawsuit, swept under the rug. They made it all disappear." Walker stepped closer. "We need proof, Howard. Something we can take public." Howard swallowed hard. "There's a file. A physical file. They don't keep it on city servers, too risky. It's stored in the basement archives at City Hall. Locked cabinet. Code 4716. Vanessa's heart raced. "You're sure?" Howard nodded. "Positive. I've seen it. Every complaint, every cover-up, it's all in there." Cindy glanced at Walker. "We need to move. Fast." But Howard grabbed Vanessa's arm, his face pale with fear. "You don't understand. If you go in there, they'll know. They'll be waiting." Vanessa pulled her arm free. "Let them." Walker shook his head. "We're not doing this alone. We need backup." Howard laughed bitterly. "Good luck finding any inside that building. They're all in on it." Walker looked at Vanessa, his jaw tight. "You still want to do this?" Vanessa nodded without hesitation. "I'm finishing this." Walker took a deep breath and pulled out his phone. He called in a favor, an old friend at the DOJ who had been tracking corruption in Southern police departments for years. He didn't tell Vanessa everything, but the way he spoke, the urgency in his voice, told her this was bigger than Savannah. This was federal. The call ended with one clear instruction: "Hold the building. Agents are on the way." Walker hung up and turned to the group. "We go in. We lock it down. We wait for the feds." Vanessa's pulse quickened. "Let's move!" They piled back into the cruiser and headed straight for City Hall. This time, there was no back alley, no side entrance. Walker parked the car right out front, lights flashing. They walked straight up the steps like they owned the place. Inside, the building was quiet, but too quiet. Vanessa could feel it again. The trap, the eyes watching from the shadows. They reached the security desk, where two officers stood waiting. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, stepped forward. "Evening, Captain," he sneered. "What brings you back so soon?" Walker didn't flinch. "We're here for the archives," the officer smirked. "Building's closed." Walker leaned in, his voice low. "Not to me." The officer's face darkened. "You're making a mistake, Walker." Walker smiled coldly. "Not the first time. Won't be the last." They pushed past the desk, heading for the basement stairs. Vanessa's heart pounded louder with every step. Cindy stayed behind them, covering their backs. When they reached the bottom, Howard guided them to the locked cabinet. He punched in the code 4716. The lock clicked open. Inside, thick files stuffed with documents waited. Walker grabbed the largest one, flipping it open. Vanessa leaned in, reading over his shoulder. Names, dates, complaints, evidence, years of cover-ups, years of corruption. It was all there. And just as they turned to leave, they heard the footsteps, dozens of boots pounding down the stairs. They were surrounded. The air in the basement turned ice cold. The sound of boots slamming against the stairs echoed through the concrete walls like a drum roll before a disaster. Vanessa's pulse roared in her ears, but her feet didn't move. She stood her ground, staring at the thick file in Walker's hands like it was the last piece of truth she might ever hold. Cindy's voice cracked through the silence. "We've got company." Walker shoved the file into Vanessa's arms. "Take it. No matter what happens, don't let them take it from you." Vanessa grabbed the file and pressed it tight against her chest. "What do we do?" Walker turned to face the stairs, standing between Vanessa and the sound of boots getting closer. Cindy drew her weapon and took position beside him. Howard Daniels stood frozen, his face pale as a ghost. "We hold the line," Walker said. And then they came into view 6 officers in riot gear, armed and ready. Leading them was none other than Deputy Chief Aldridge, the very man Howard had just accused of covering up everything. His face twisted into something dark, something Vanessa would never forget. "Well, well," Aldridge sneered. "The traitor and his little guests." Walker didn't flinch. "This ends tonight, Aldridge. We have the file. It's over." Aldridge laughed, slow and mocking. "You think a few pieces of paper are going to stop this? You think anyone in this city's going to believe her over us?" Vanessa stepped forward, clutching the file tight. "They already do." Aldridge's eyes darkened. He signaled to his men. "Take them." The officers moved in fast. Cindy fired the first warning shot into the ceiling, causing everyone to duck. Walker drew his weapon next, standing firm. Vanessa's heart raced as she backed up toward the far wall, clutching the file like it was her last breath. "Stand down!" Walker roared. "Federal agents are on their way. You make one move, and you'll be facing charges before sunrise." Aldridge smirked. "You're bluffing." And then sirens. Loud, close, getting louder by the second. Everyone froze. Walker smiled coldly. "Go ahead, open those doors. See who's waiting outside." Aldridge hesitated. The sound of tires screeching outside told Vanessa all she needed to know: the feds were here. Real backup. Finally. But Aldridge wasn't ready to surrender. Not yet. He pointed at Vanessa. "Grab her, now!" 2 officers lunged toward her. Vanessa ducked, clutching the file as she scrambled toward the far end of the basement. Cindy fired again, this time hitting the wall just inches from the men chasing Vanessa. "Back off!" Cindy shouted. Walker pushed forward, tackling one of the men to the ground. The basement erupted into chaos, shouting, scrambling, fists flying. Howard ducked into a corner, covering his head. Vanessa spotted a small side door near the old utility shelves. Without thinking, she bolted toward it, pushing it open with her shoulder. A dark hallway stretched out in front of her. She didn't know where it led, but she didn't care. She had to get that file out. She had to make sure the truth survived. Behind her, the fight raged on. She could hear Cindy shouting, Walker slamming someone into the wall. But she didn't stop. She sprinted down the hallway, the file pressed tight against her chest. And then, a door, a way out. She pushed through, stumbling into the night air. Flashing lights blinded her. Black SUVs lined the street. Agents in tactical gear stormed the building. She heard someone shout her name. "Vanessa, over here!" She turned to see a tall black woman in a navy suit waving her over. The woman held up a badge, DOJ. Vanessa didn't wait. She ran straight toward her, clutching the file like it was her last lifeline. The agent caught her, steadying her. "Are you hurt?" Vanessa shook her head, breathless. "I have it. The file. Everything." The agent nodded. "We've got you now." Agents swarmed the building. Within minutes, Aldridge and his men were being pulled out in handcuffs. Cindy and Walker emerged next, battered but standing. The crowd outside, neighbors, reporters, protesters, erupted into cheers. Vanessa stood in the middle of it all, shaking, tears filling her eyes. But she didn't fall. She didn't break. She stood taller than she ever had before. The agent turned to her. "You're coming with us. You'll be protected. You'll be heard." Vanessa nodded slowly. For the first time all day, she let herself believe it. Walker pushed through the crowd, reaching her side, his face bruised, his uniform ripped, but his eyes shining with something she hadn't seen before: pride. "You did it," he whispered. Vanessa let out a shaky breath. "We did it." And just like that, Savannah's darkest secrets were no longer hidden. The truth had finally come to light. But for Vanessa Cole, this was just the beginning. The early morning sky over Savannah didn't look the same. It wasn't the pink and gold sunrise the city was used to. It was heavier, gray, like the weight of everything that had come crashing down the night before was still hanging in the air. But inside the federal field office on the outskirts of town, something else was brewing, something that looked a lot like accountability. Vanessa Cole sat at a long table inside a secured conference room. In front of her lay the file, tagged, logged, and backed up in more places than she could count. 2 federal agents sat across from her, taking notes, nodding slowly as they reviewed every single page. She could barely believe it herself. Names, dates, signatures, evidence of years of corruption protected by city officials, police leadership, and even members of the state legislature. It wasn't just about Blake Tanner anymore. He had been the visible crack in a much bigger wall. A wall that, by the looks of it, was starting to collapse. Walker sat beside her, his arm bandaged, his face still bruised from the fight in the basement. Cindy stood near the door, arms crossed, watching every move the agents made. None of them had slept. None of them had left Vanessa's side. And none of them were ready to let this thing go. The lead agent leaned forward. "Miss Cole, I need you to understand something," she began, her voice calm but serious. "What you did here, this isn't just going to shake Savannah. This is going to hit statewide, maybe even higher." Vanessa nodded. "That's the point, isn't it?" The agent glanced at her partner before continuing. "We have enough here to open a full-scale federal investigation. But you need to be ready for the backlash. These people, they won't go quietly. You've already seen what they're capable of." Vanessa leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for just a moment. She could still see the spray-painted message in her hotel room, still feel the weight of Tanner's hands on her body, still hear the voices of the people in the park watching, recording, standing up. "I didn't come this far to back down now," she whispered. Walker nodded in agreement. "Neither did we." The agent sighed, but a small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Good, because you're gonna need all the strength you've got." Vanessa stood, pushing the chair back with a quiet scrape. "So what happens next?" The agent stood too. "We take this public, properly, with evidence, with witnesses. We'll coordinate with the Department of Justice and announce the investigation. But you," she pointed at Vanessa, "you're the key to all of it. You're the face they tried to silence, and you're the reason this story matters." Vanessa swallowed hard. She knew that was true. And she knew what came with it: pressure, attention, danger. But also something else: hope. Walker stood beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone," he said quietly. Vanessa looked around the room, the agents, Walker, Cindy. She nodded. "I know." Within hours, the DOJ held a press conference. Agents confirmed a full investigation into the city of Savannah's police department and government officials. They named names, listed charges, announced immediate suspensions and arrests. The city erupted again. But this time, it wasn't in anger. It was in something closer to relief. For the first time in years, people saw real consequences. News outlets played the footage of Vanessa speaking in the park on a loop. Social media flooded with hashtags "Justice for Vanessa," "Savannah Exposed," "Stand with her." Her inbox overflowed with messages from people all over the country, some thanking her, some offering support, others sharing their own stories of injustice. Vanessa sat in the back of the room, away from the cameras, watching it all unfold. She knew this wasn't the end. It was just the start of a much longer fight. But for the first time, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Walker sat down beside her, sliding a cup of coffee across the table. "You did good," he said softly. Vanessa let out a breathless laugh. "Feels like I just survived a war." Walker nodded. "In a way, you did." Cindy leaned against the doorway, her arms still crossed. "They're gonna come for you again, you know. They always do." Vanessa met her gaze. "Then I'll be ready." And she meant it. Because for the first time in a long time, Vanessa Cole wasn't just defending herself, she was defending something bigger. A community, a city, maybe even a country that had waited too long to face its own reflection. As the cameras kept rolling, as the headlines kept spinning, as the city tried to figure out what came next, Vanessa knew exactly where she stood, right in the center of it all, unshaken, unapologetic, and more determined than ever. It didn't take long for the headlines to change. In just 24 hours, the entire narrative had flipped. What started as another routine case of "officer did nothing wrong" had exploded into something no one could ignore. The DOJ's official announcement had sparked waves across the state. The mayor held an emergency press conference. The city council scrambled to distance itself from the scandal. And Savannah's police chief, the same man who had publicly praised Tanner just months ago, quietly submitted his resignation. But Vanessa Cole? She wasn't done. Not even close. She stood outside the courthouse the next morning. The same courthouse where Tanner had testified in dozens of cases. The same courthouse where so many victims before her had walked out with nothing but broken spirits and empty hands. But today was different. Today, she wasn't just standing for herself. She was standing for every name in that file, every voice that had been silenced, every life that had been torn apart by the same system that tried to humiliate her. Cameras surrounded her again. Reporters pushed microphones in her face. But this time, she was ready. She held up a single sheet of paper, an official filing for a civil rights lawsuit against the city of Savannah, the Savannah Police Department, and every official named in the corruption scandal. The crowd erupted in questions. "Miss Cole, do you really think this will change anything? Are you afraid of retaliation? Why are you still here when you could have gone back to D.C.?" Vanessa raised her hand, silencing them all. "I came to Savannah to work on national security," she said. "But I found something just as important: community security. No one should ever be humiliated, assaulted, or silenced by the very people sworn to protect them." Her voice didn't shake this time. It was stronger than ever. "I'm filing this lawsuit not just for me, but for every citizen of this city who deserves better. For every person who didn't have a camera watching. For every victim whose story was buried. This is just the beginning. I won't stop until justice is served." The applause that followed wasn't just from the crowd outside. It echoed through every phone, every live stream, every household watching from a distance. Savannah was waking up. And Vanessa Cole had become the face of a movement no one could shut down. Walker stood nearby, his arms crossed, watching her with something close to admiration. Cindy stood by his side, her badge clipped to her belt, like she finally understood what it really meant to wear it. As Vanessa finished her statement and turned to head back inside, Walker caught up to her. "You sure you're ready for this fight?" he asked quietly. Vanessa didn't slow down. "I was born ready." Inside the courthouse, her legal team was already waiting. Lawyers from national civil rights organizations, advisors from D.C. who had flown in overnight, people who believed in her, not because of her title, but because of what she stood for. The lawsuit wasn't just about money. It was about exposing every layer of corruption that had allowed men like Tanner to thrive. It was about forcing the city to answer for the years of damage it had done to its own people. And more than anything, it was about building a system that finally protected those who needed it most. As the paperwork was filed and the courthouse buzzed with reporters, Vanessa knew the real work was just beginning. Lawsuits took time. Change took even longer. But she was here for all of it. Later that night, she stood in front of a small community center packed with local residents. There were no cameras this time, no reporters. Just people. Real people. Grandmothers. Veterans. Young parents holding their kids. Survivors of police violence who had never spoken out before. Vanessa stood on the small stage, looking out over the crowd. And for the first time, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in Dayshope. "You all know why I'm here," she began. "But I'm not here to make speeches. I'm here to listen, to hear your stories, to build something with you, not for you." One by one, people stood and spoke. Some shared their own experiences with police harassment. Some talked about their fear of walking the streets at night. Others just stood silently, tears in their eyes, grateful that someone was finally listening. And when it was over, Vanessa made a promise. Not just to them, but to herself. "We're not going to let this moment pass," she said. "We're going to build something real, together." As she stepped off the stage, Walker met her at the edge of the room. "You're really staying here, aren't you?" he asked. Vanessa smiled softly. "Looks like Savannah just became my new home." And in that moment, surrounded by the very people who had once felt powerless, Vanessa Cole knew she had found something far more valuable than any title, contract, or headline. She had found her purpose. The sun had barely risen, but the phones were already ringing. The media wasn't done with Savannah. Neither was the country. Vanessa Cole's face had been on every major network by sunrise, her words replayed on a loop. But today wasn't about the cameras. Today wasn't about speeches or press conferences. Today was about taking action. Vanessa sat on the worn leather couch inside the Mount Hope Community Center. The very place Walker had first brought her when things had started spiraling out of control. It had become something of a headquarters now, a safe space, a war room. Around her sat people from all walks of life, local pastors, business owners, teachers, young activists who had shown up the night before, asking what they could do to help. It wasn't a political campaign. It wasn't a staged photo op. It was real people coming together to build something that hadn't existed in Savannah for Decadessa United Front. Walker stood by the window, arms crossed as usual, keeping an eye on the street. Cindy paced the back of the room, her phone buzzing every few minutes with updates from federal agents still processing evidence downtown. Vanessa leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. "We can't wait for the lawsuit to work itself through the courts. We have to start protecting people now." Reverend Peterson nodded from across the room. "What do you have in mind?" Vanessa took a deep breath. "A legal defense fund. Free legal representation for anyone who's been harassed, assaulted, or wrongfully arrested by this department. We use Coltech's resources. We bring in outside attorneys. We don't wait for the system to fix itself. We force it to." The room fell silent for a moment as the weight of her words settled over them. "That's a hell of a commitment," Walker finally said. Vanessa nodded. "I'm all in. Savannah deserves better. And so do all the people who've been too afraid to speak up." Cindy stopped pacing. "We could offer protection, too. Witness support. Help people feel safe enough to come forward." Vanessa smiled. "Exactly." Reverend Peterson leaned forward, his voice soft but strong. "And what do you call this movement?" Vanessa paused for a long moment. She glanced around the room at Walker, at Cindy, at every face staring back at her. And then it hit her. "The Cole Initiative," she whispered. "Not just my name, all of ours. A legacy of standing up, not backing down." The room erupted in quiet agreement. Heads nodded, eyes filled with hope. They had a name, they had a mission. Now, they just had to take it to the people. By noon, word had already spread across the city. Flyers appeared in barbershops, churches, and grocery stores. Social media lit up with announcements. Volunteers hit the streets, passing out information about free legal services and community meetings. The city that had once tried to silence Vanessa Cole was now carrying her message for her. And it wasn't just Savannah. Calls started pouring in from nearby cities: Augusta, Macon, even Charleston. People wanted to know how they could bring the Cole Initiative to their communities, how they could fight back, too. Vanessa stood in the middle of the community center, watching it all unfold. She had come here thinking she'd be gone in a weekend. But here she was, building something bigger than herself. Something that might actually last. Walker approached her again, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Looks like you started something you can't walk away from." Vanessa let out a soft laugh. "Good. I don't plan to." Cindy walked up beside them, holding her phone. "DOJ wants to schedule a second press conference. They're about to file federal charges against several city officials." Vanessa nodded. "Tell them I'll be there, but this time, I'm bringing the whole city with me." And she meant it. The next day, hundreds gathered outside City Hall. But this time, they weren't protesting. They were standing united, shoulder to shoulder, waiting for the moment that justice would take one more step forward. When Vanessa took the podium, she didn't stand alone. Walker stood on one side, Cindy on the other. Reverend Peterson, local leaders, victims who had come forward because of her courage. The DOJ official read the charges: allowed abuse of power, civil rights violations, conspiracy to obstruct justice. One by one, the names were listed, and with every name, the crowd grew louder, bolder, stronger. Vanessa stepped forward once again, her voice steady, her heart full. "Savannah has made history," she declared, "not because we exposed corruption, but because we refused to let it define us. We stood together, we spoke out, and now we're building something new, something better." The crowd erupted in applause. And for the first time since she had stepped off that plane, Vanessa Cole felt the weight of her journey finally lift. She had come to Savannah as a visitor, but she was leaving as something far greater. She was leaving as a symbol, a leader, and most importantly, as one of them. If there's one thing this story teaches us, it's that you're never too small to make a difference, and you're never too old to stand for what's right. Vanessa Cole walked into a city where power had gone unchecked for far too long. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't a celebrity. She was just one woman who refused to stay silent. And look what happened. Her courage exposed corruption, brought people together, and sparked change that reached far beyond Savannah. You see, sometimes we think the fight belongs to the next generation, that it's their time now, not ours. But the truth is, wisdom has no expiration date. Experience is still one of the most powerful tools we carry. And when we choose to speak up, when we share our stories, when we stand up for our neighbors, we remind the world that our voice still matters. So don't ever think your time has passed. Whether you're 30 or 80, you still have something to give. You still have a story that can make a difference. Because sometimes, all it takes is one voice to change everything. If this message inspired you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you'll never miss another story that matters. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.